Part 20. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 191. On a high building in the ruins of a city several dozen kilometers away from Lannan City, a mysterious purple-robed man stood on the roof, and his real face could not be seen under the cover of the hood. Haha, I guess it won't be long before the human army will capture the city. I hope the Corpse King is prepared. The plain words were weak and powerless, as if he was a dying person who was terminally ill. As soon as the purple-robed man finished speaking, his figure began to become gradually illusory, and finally turned into a group of misty mist and dissipated out of thin air. Tianlai Novel Network. As the purple-robed man disappeared, a tall figure appeared on the top floor. The sound of heavy footsteps sounded, and a burly man in armor appeared on the eaves of the roof. The strange thing is that the man's face was covered with cracks, his face was extremely dark, and his movements were slow, unlike ordinary people. It looked like a terracotta warrior who had just been unearthed. There was a rustling sound of footsteps behind the armored man. A pretty woman in a white wedding dress, holding flowers in her hands, walked slowly from the shadow of the building to the armored man. The wedding dress was as white as snow, highlighting the woman's perfect figure. The necklace on her neck was beautiful and dazzling, and the rose in her hand was bright red. Although the woman had a beautiful face, her eyes were empty and lifeless, her face was bloodless, and there were faint blue veins on her forehead. Black blood vessels could even be clearly seen under her fair skin. This woman, who was extremely well cared for, turned out to be a zombie. Unlike other zombies that can be seen everywhere, this zombie was neatly dressed, and the clean wedding dress was extremely gorgeous. A bloodthirsty and fierce light suddenly appeared in the eyes of the female corpse, and the expression on her face became slightly hideous. The armored man beside him reached out and gently held the female corpse's palm, and the bloody light in the latter's eyes faded again in an instant. The armored man stood on the roof, overlooking the chaotic and decaying city streets below. There, countless pairs of red pupils were filled with the color of blood desire. The armored man's cracked lips suddenly moved. "Dear, no one can destroy our home." The hoarse voice came out of the armored man's mouth, but the wedding dress female corpse beside him did not react. "This is my promise to you." The armored man suddenly turned around and leaned over to kiss the pale face of the female corpse. In the corpse city, on the high building, two figures stuck together, indistinguishable from each other. "Don't come over." The streets were full of zombie skeletons, and the buildings on both sides were full of bullet holes with gunpowder smoke. In front of a large supermarket, a shirtless, muscular man holding a rifle shouted at the many members of the law enforcement team in front of him. "Get out of here." Beside the muscular man, there were dozens of men holding guns. Some of them looked like animals, with strong bodies, and were obviously awakened people with superpowers. Behind these men, there were hundreds of ragged survivors squatting on the ground, looking thin. When Muchu and others arrived, they saw this scene. Dozens of modified armored vehicles surrounded the supermarket, and hundreds of law enforcement team members surrounded the supermarket. Dozens of men in front of the supermarket were holding guns and confronting the law enforcement team members, and hundreds of emaciated survivors were squatting behind them. This scene was a bit like a pre-apocalyptic police and gangster movie, with kidnappers holding hundreds of hostages and confronting the military. "What's going on?" Ji Yufeng rushed to the side of a leading awakened law enforcement team member and asked calmly. "Captain." The member of the law enforcement team said, "We met several scavenging wanderers on the way to the mission." Wanderers are a general term for the surviving humans who survive in the cracks of the ruins. Ji Yufeng turned his head and looked into the compartment of the military vehicle next to him. There were several haggard humans huddled in the compartment and shivering, and from time to time they glanced at the shirtless men in front of the supermarket with fear in their eyes. According to these wanderers, many survivors, including them, were controlled by these men with drugs and were in a coerced environment for a long time. Ji Yufeng nodded, guessing the truth from just a few words from his men. It has been several years since the end of the world, and there are still some human survivors living in dangerous urban ruins. Some of them are forced to survive in the cracks of the city due to the pressure of zombie monsters from the outside world. But there are also some people with superpowers, who live happily in the ruins with their extraordinary courage and tyrannical strength. The dozens of burly men in front of the supermarket were obviously the latter. Mu Qiu yawned and ate cereal in the car boredly. He had already felt that there were indeed more than a dozen awakened men standing in front of the supermarket and confronting the law enforcement team. There were even a few people with A-level energy fluctuations. As long as this level of strength acted cautiously and did not encounter S-level heretics or besieged by zombies, it would be barely possible to survive in such a ruin. As for the ordinary humans behind them, they looked pale and skinny, and most of them had new and old wounds on their bodies. It is estimated that he was often whipped and enslaved by these awakened people. It seems that these awakened people have used their abilities to drive these ordinary people. It is nothing more than forcing those ordinary people to go out to collect food resources, and feed themselves fat and white. In the end times, such examples of tyranny are everywhere, which is not surprising. The reason why the law enforcement team did not take a strong attack was to take into account the ordinary survivors who were held hostage. Otherwise, hundreds of awakened people could slap these dozens of robbers to death with one slap each. Brother, these humans are so interesting. Behind him, Dyer let out a giggle of laughter, and a faint red light flashed in her eyes. In the final analysis, it's just plundering resources from each other. Mu Qiu's mouth corners also rose, watching the good show in front with interest. Well, he decided to name it a good show. Get out of here, or no one here will survive. The shirtless man in the lead held a rifle, the black barrel of the gun pointed at the hundreds of survivors squatting behind him, his face fierce. The scene was deadlocked for a while, and finally, a naked, crazy woman got up from the ground and staggered towards the law enforcement team. Help, help, they are a group of devils. The woman's hair was disheveled, her expression was crazy, and she ran towards the law enforcement team hysterically. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and a ball of blood mist suddenly exploded in front of the woman's chest. The light in the woman's eyes suddenly dimmed, and then her body fell powerlessly in a pool of blood. Asshole! In front of the crowd of law enforcement teams, Ji Yu looked at the desperate look of the woman before she fell, and her pretty face was full of anger. After shooting the woman, the shirtless man fired several more shots into the air and shouted at the survivors behind him. I said, if anyone dares to escape, I will be the first to die. Before the man finished speaking, he suddenly felt a blockage in his throat, and a ball of warmth came out of his throat. Blood splattered, and the rifle in his hand fell. A white figure appeared in front of him at some point, holding a hot laser sword in his hand that was dazzling. The indifferent face was the last seen in front of the shirtless man. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 192. Just when the situation was at a stalemate, Ji Yufeng, dressed in a white suit, stepped out. No one even knew when Ji Yufeng disappeared. A ghostly white figure suddenly appeared behind the shirtless man holding a gun. Immediately, a magnificent blue beam of light streaked through the air, like the scythe of death reaping life. A large amount of blood suddenly splattered from the neck of the shirtless man, and he lay down weakly. There was a loud pop sound, and the man's angry-eyed corpse fell into a pool of blood. The whole process happened in the blink of an eye, and Ji Yufeng's sudden attack even surprised the men of the law enforcement team. Me, fight them. The leader of the gangster was killed by Ji Yufeng, and many shirtless men around him also reacted at this moment. They have survived in the depths of the ruins for several years, and their personalities are naturally cruel and crazy. They are the real desperados in the apocalypse. In an instant, dozens of black guns were pointed in Ji Yufeng's direction. At the same time, the remaining dozen or so awakened people with supernatural powers also changed their body shapes and quickly attacked the white figure in front of them. There was a series of bang gunshots, gunpowder smoke filled the air, and countless bullets with residual heat of sparks shot out from the barrel of the gun. There were dozens of strange-looking figures swooping around. Feeling the sound of breaking through the air in his ears, Ji Yufeng pushed the frame of the mirror with an indifferent expression. A white light curtain flashed past, making it difficult to see his expression clearly. The next moment, the space around Ji Yufeng twisted and twisted like ripples, and the whole person disappeared out of thin air. The bullets hit the ground like lightning bolts, leaving countless smoky bullet holes. WWW. And the attacks of the dozen awakened ones were in vain. Where are the people? Before the dozens of robbers could react, a strong gust of wind suddenly passed over the head of one of the shirtless, muscular men. The blue laser sword beam passed by, and a human head spurting blood was thrown into the sky. Immediately afterwards, white vortexes appeared frequently from around the robbers. The strange white ghost-like figure holds a blue lightsaber, harvesting fresh lives without any emotion. Even a few awakens above Class B have not been able to escape the punishment of death. Within a few breaths, dozens of headless corpses were already lying on the ground. The warm blood flowed to the ground and gradually gathered into a dark red pool of blood. A white figure was reflected in the center of the pool of blood, with white hair flying in the wind, but the white suit he was wearing was not stained at all. It wasn't until this moment that the hostages squatting on the ground at the back finally reacted and looked at the cold-tempered figure in the pool of blood in horror. The hundreds of members of the law enforcement team surrounding him all looked at Ji Yufeng blankly, with a hint of fear deep in their eyes. It was different from the shock that Mu Qiu showed to them when he showed his earth-shattering strength. Ji Yufeng didn't have any warning when he killed, and there wasn't even any change in his expression. Cold, yet deadly. This is where the title White Death comes from. Not bad, not bad. In the carriage, Mu Qiu tore open the packaging of potato chips. He casually took out a piece and put it into the mouth of Chi-Chi, who was sitting quietly next to him. He acted as if he was watching a wonderful movie. Looking at Ji Yufeng slowly walking out of the pool of blood, his eyes were filled with admiration. This is also where he admires the monsoon wind. The attack is ruthless and the killing is decisive. Of course, if it were Mu Qiu, she might not pay attention to those human survivors at all. Once the inflammation pillar passes and all balls are dead, there will naturally be no worries about blocking the road. Ji Yufeng didn't waste any time after getting rid of many robbers and looked up at the sky. Under the eyes of a member of the law enforcement team, he gave orders to the middle-aged man beside him, place these survivors and follow the car. Immediately afterwards, he took out his walkie-talkie and said to the team scattered around the city. Time is running out, everyone must gather at the target location and prepare to go to the next city. The originally agreed plan stipulated the gathering time for the 4 teams, and they would not waste time in one city. A few hours later, hundreds of vehicles of various models were passing through the road at the end of the city like steel beasts. Countless zombie limbs and blood stains were scattered along the way, and the dust was flying. In an off-road vehicle in front of the convoy, the fat man's mouth twitched and he turned to look at Mu Qiu behind him. Lin Feng, wrapped in bandages, lay limply in the passenger seat, helpless. I said, "Why am I driving?" The fat man wanted to cry but had no tears. He was caught by Mu Qiu and acted as the driver just as he was passing by. Mu Qiu leaned in the spacious carriage at the rear with a leisurely expression and waved her hand. Xiao Lin's injury has not healed yet. You can't bear to let a sick person drive. I'll thank you for the hard work. The corners of Fatty's mouth twitched again, and finally he looked at Lin Feng and stepped on the accelerator harder. After a long battle, Lin Feng was already physically and mentally exhausted. Coupled with the forcible ignition of the flames in the body is in a state of overload for a long time. The majestic energy directly broke several meridians in his body. It's like the sequelae of cheating. Although his limbs were not completely broken due to the healing of Mukayama's spell, he still had to rest for a while. The young man's practice has not yet succeeded, and he needs to continue working hard. While the vehicle was driving, Jiu's soft voice came from the communication device in the car. The next target city is Tonghe City, which is dozens of kilometers away from Lannan City. This is a collective broadcast connected to the communication devices in hundreds of vehicles, mainly used to transmit intelligence. Several search teams have lost contact in this city before, and the preliminary determination of the danger level is red. I hope you will act with caution. The danger factor of Lannan City has been greatly reduced after the disappearance of the mysterious destructive heretic soul-devouring butterfly emperor. What's more, after many previous battles, most of the high-level heretics in Lannan City have been eliminated. So the large force completed the city's clearing operation with almost no obstacles. But no one knows what dangerous existence will be encountered in the subsequent battles. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 193. At dusk, Ji Yufeng, dressed in old white clothes, leaned against the corner of the ruins of the city. The light blue laser sword in his hand glowed faintly. Under him, lay the mutilated remains of a large area of hideous-looking zombies. After a day of fierce fighting, his originally clean and tidy white suit was stained with large amounts of blood. The air was filled with the stench of rotting corpses and blood, pungent and nauseating. On the ground covered with broken corpses of zombies, you can occasionally see a few human corpses. On the street not far ahead, there were hundreds of members of the law enforcement team, lowering their heads and looking for something in the pile of corpses from time to time. They are searching for the missing zombie cores. In the apocalypse, these cores are absolute hard currency. A day had passed since they arrived in Tonghe City. Over the course of the day, convoys carrying thousands of people passed through several urban areas. After crushing the sea of blood composed of countless zombie monsters, they finally arrived at the area marked as a yellow area. The door of the abandoned convenience store across the street was suddenly pushed open from inside. Mu Qiu, wearing a black windbreaker and a white shirt, walked out of the convenience store holding a box of dried fruits. His leisurely demeanor and gentle movements were in stark contrast to the cautious-looking law enforcement members around him who had not yet recovered from the battle just now. Ji Yufeng turned around and saw this extremely inconsistent scene. Mu Qiu noticed Ji Yufeng's gaze, raised the dried fruit in her hand, and said with a smile, "Want some?" Ji Yufeng had a trace of blood on his face and slowly shook his head. At this moment, the intercom on Ji Yufeng's chest suddenly flashed red. Ji Yufeng picked up the walkie-talkie, and a slightly excited voice came from inside. "Captain, a group of human survivors were found here, numbering about 100 people. We're bringing them here now." Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed. "I see." Mu Qiu also heard the news from the side, narrowed her eyes slightly, and ate another piece of dried fruit. Within a few quarters of an hour, teams that went out to search came back one after another. Several teams brought back some ragged, emaciated human survivors. Most of these survivors are ordinary people without special powers, living in the darkness of this ruin without enough food, unkempt, like beggars. Not taking a shower for a long time left these survivors with a disgusting stench. The stench that comes from getting closer even covers up the smell of blood that fills the air. Of course, there are some survivors who are still neatly dressed. Most of these people are awakened people with supernatural powers and are doing well in the ruins. After more than a dozen teams rushed back, a law enforcement team with several military vehicles also rushed back. A group of uniformed law enforcement team members stepped out of the car. The spacious carriage at the rear was filled with dozens of neatly dressed human survivors. The appearance of these human survivors is very different from the beggar-looking survivors brought back by the previous teams. He was strong and energetic, and at first glance he thought he was a member of a search party. A man wearing law enforcement uniform walked up to Ji Yufeng, followed by two figures, a man and a woman. The man is tall and strong, with a yellowish complexion. The woman next to him has a beautiful face, but her expression seems a little dull. Both of them appear to be in their 20s. "Captain, this is a team of survivors we found in a large shopping mall, headed by Mr. Zhang." The muscular man took the woman's hand and came to Ji Yufeng, stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "After wandering around the city for so long, I finally met an organization. Nice to meet you, Zhang Yuan. This is my wife Yun'er." The man called Mr. Zhang pointed to the beautiful woman next to him. "Ji Yufeng." Ji Yufeng shook hands with him calmly and asked seemingly naturally, "Have you always stayed in the city?" Turning to look at the dozens of survivors behind the man, Ji Yufeng could feel the energy fluctuations radiating from their bodies. These people are all awakened people with superpowers. Zhang Yuan was stunned when he was questioned directly by Ji Yufeng. He did not expect that the person in front of him was so direct and did not say a polite word. But Zhang Yuan still said, "Yes, we are all trapped here after the apocalypse breaks out. The brothers have all awakened their powers, and they are all human beings. They gradually gathered together to survive." After saying that, Zhang Yuan also revealed his superpower. The muscles in his arms were all taut, and his skin was an earthy yellow color, solid and implying strength. According to the energy fluctuations it releases, Zhang Yuan is clearly an A-level awakener. Ji Yufeng looked at the woman in white who was always beside him. Although this woman has a fair complexion and a delicate appearance, her eyes are quite hollow and her expression is dull. Zhang Yuan opened his mouth and explained, "Yun'er is my wife. In the apocalypse, something happened, and she became like this. She has no powers. I was worried that something would happen to her, so I kept her with me." The cruel experiences of the apocalypse have led to drastic changes in many people's temperaments, and there are many examples of mental problems. Ji Yufeng stared at the woman named Yun'er and counted her breaths. The latter still looked dull and showed no reaction. Ji Yufeng looked at Zhang Yuan calmly and said, "People like you are rare in the last days." Zhang Yuan smiled calmly. "I once promised Yun'er that I would never give up for the rest of my life. This is my promise. No matter what kind of oath, nothing can compare to the companionship and support between life and death." Ji Yu beside her couldn't help but look moved. "It's so romantic." Ji Yufeng nodded and looked at the dozens of fellow survivors behind Zhang Yuan. The dozens of survivors were also chatting with several members of the law enforcement team. Their expressions were normal and there was nothing unusual about their actions. During the conversation, the hum of vehicle engines came from the distant horizon. Dozens more search teams rushed back. A middle-aged man from the law enforcement team came over. "Mr. Zhang, please come here to register. We also need to learn more about the distribution of zombies around. Most of the awakened people walking in the ruins of the city are experienced and stronger than the awakened people in the base. Therefore, these awakened people searched for in the city are also a force that cannot be ignored." Zhang Yuan nodded when he heard the words, took the hand of the woman in white next to him, and greeted the dozens of companions who stood up. However, no one noticed, just across the street, Mu Qiu, who was wearing a black robe, was leaning against the corner, holding a bag of dried fruits that she had just taken out. She looked at Zhang Yuan and his entourage leaving with narrowed eyes and a smile on her face. Next to Mu Qiu, a strange pink butterfly circled around Mu Qiu's shoulder. The girl's melodious laughter came. "Brother, things are starting to get interesting. Miu threw a piece of dried fruit into her mouth and raised the corners of her mouth slightly. Yeah, it's starting to get interesting. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 194. Thousands of troops were ready to go on the decayed and mottled streets, forming a circle. Military vehicles and tanks with blood on their surfaces were neatly arranged around the team. The smell of gunpowder and gunfire was still faintly left on the black barrels. The faces of the thousands of awakened people standing on both sides were serious and dignified. The air was filled with the solemn atmosphere of an upcoming war. Yufeng, everyone is ready. A middle-aged man in a suit walked to the center of the team and gestured to Ji Yufeng in white. The latter glanced at a black figure lying on his side on an off-road vehicle among the many armored modified vehicles not far away. I saw Miu lying on the roof of the off-road vehicle at some point, with his hands crossed behind his head, his eyes closed, and a leisurely expression. Seeing the leisurely black-clad figure, who was quite different from the solemn-looking law enforcement soldiers around him, no one on the scene had any grudges or showed any resentment on their faces. The reason was simple. His tyrannical strength had already convinced everyone on the scene of this Ice King, whose every move was earth-shattering. Many people even raised the status of this Ice King to above the White Death God in their hearts. The strong have inherent privileges. Ji Yufeng nodded. Let's get started. As Ji Yufeng's voice fell, the law enforcement soldier who was carrying the cannon on his shoulder pulled the trigger in an instant. With a loud bang, a shell soared into the sky, bursting like fireworks in the sky. At the moment the shell exploded, a thick dark green fog spread from the shell, accompanied by a faint fragrance. The breeze blew, and the dark green mist spread over the city. After a while, the sky above the team of thousands of people was filled with this dark green haze with a fresh fragrance. And everyone on the street below was looking at the depths of the city in the distance at this moment, and some people even had cold sweat on their foreheads. Roar! In less than half a minute, the low roars of zombies in the depths of the city reached everyone's ears. Then, the ground began to shake violently like an earthquake, and the crazy roar became clearer in everyone's ears. Here it comes! Someone in the team exclaimed, and then everyone's pupils began to shrink as they looked straight into the distance. At the end of the horizon, dark and hideous figures began to emerge. A wave of rolling zombies suddenly emerged around the city as far as the eye could see. Zombies from all directions rushed towards the center of the street where they were like hungry wolves. The white pupils, deformed bodies, twisted facial features, and the hateful and hideous faces were clearly visible. Everywhere you look is a terrifying zombie tide. Fire! With the middle-aged man's loud shout, the barrels of the military vehicles and tanks parked around the team immediately rose, emitting a series of deafening and earth-shattering noises. The artillery fire was continuous, the smoke was filled, and countless shells with destructive breath dragged long-tail flames and smashed directly into the fierce zombie tide in all directions. Boom! In an instant, the light and flames connected with the sky, and violent explosions raged in the city. The houses in the distance collapsed countlessly under the explosion of the shells, and the strong smell of gunpowder was everywhere in every corner of the street. The explosion of each shell would bring up a cloud of smoke, and at the same time took away the lives of hundreds of terrifying zombies. In an instant, the originally peaceful streets turned into an extreme battlefield between humans and zombie monsters. The already deployed guns and bullets were fired wildly in all directions. Rotten flesh and blood flew in the air, and the roars of zombies and the sound of gunfire filled the sky above the entire city center. Those low-level ordinary zombies were still flesh and blood after all, and could not withstand the baptism of gunfire. In an instant, countless zombies were turned into corpses under the impact of artillery fire and bullets. But how huge was the number of zombies that gathered in several blocks? In a few quarters of an hour, countless zombie monsters rushed forward. They rushed towards the coalition team of thousands of people like fearless Deadpools. Thousands of human awakeners who were ready to go had a fierce collision and confrontation with the zombies. A myriad of special abilities and colorful energy beams flashed frequently in the human camp. In an instant, blood splashed and surged between humans and zombies, and the horn of fighting had already appeared. Ji Yufeng held a blue laser in both hands and flashed among the zombies. People could only see a white figure flashing by quickly, followed by a large number of zombie limbs and arms, heads flying, and blood rising. What was a little surprising was that there were also powerful and outstanding people among the wanderers brought back from the ruins by the law enforcement team. In the rolling zombies, a strong man was followed by a beautiful woman with a dull expression. Behind the two, there were dozens of human companions with normal faces. It was Zhang Yuan and his party who had just joined the team a few days ago. Hundreds of fierce and terrifying zombies were seen besieging Zhang Yuan and his wife. Zhang Yuan protected his wife behind him, his body shook slightly, his strong muscles bulged, and a strong energy wave was released from his body. Zhang Yuan's arms suddenly swelled several times, his skin showed a solid earthy yellow, and his body was like a dead tree with twisted roots. Dozens of zombies rushed towards Zhang Yuan, and he punched hard, with 1,000 pounds of gravity hidden in his fist. In an instant, his strong arms hit the bodies of a row of zombies, and the strong fist force turned into air waves as if emptying the air. The dozen zombies suddenly paused, and then their bodies gradually turned yellow like clods of earth. After a few breaths, the bodies of the dozen zombies completely turned into dark yellow clods of earth, and their bodies also stopped in place. As Zhang Yuan punched out with both fists, the bodies of the zombies were as fragile as yellow sand, and they turned into powder and dissipated in the air. And the dozens of companions behind him also showed their good fighting power. They were either physically strong or agile, and it seemed that the many zombies in front of them could not bring them any pressure. Although they were all ordinary superpowers, they were better in the tacit cooperation between the team and the swiftness of the attack. In just a quarter of an hour, hundreds of zombies had already died at the hands of Zhang Yuan's team. This scene was naturally seen by many awakened people, and they all sighed that they were worthy of living in the ruins for many years and had such rich combat experience. The powerful strength of Zhang Yuan's group in the past few days has indeed made everyone look at these wanderers in the city ruins with new eyes. Not far away, Shueqianya, wearing a purple shirt and with a cold face, waved a tang sword and just killed a few ordinary zombies. But she happened to see the scene of Zhang Yuan and his team taking action. Shueqianya frowned slightly, and the expression on her face gradually became solemn. At this moment, a zombie with a sinister claw behind her pounced on the back of Shueqianya's head. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 195. A gust of wind blew past her ears, and Shueqianya seemed to sense something. She turned her head suddenly, and her eyes suddenly flashed with purple light. The mutant zombie with sharp claws suddenly stopped when Shueqianya looked back. The originally empty pupils of the sharp claw zombie showed a deep purple color. More zombies rushed towards Shueqianya, but the sharp claw zombie with purple pupils turned around and attacked the companions beside him. Shueqianya looked anxious and had no time to pay attention to the ordinary zombies around her. The round ring on her fingertip flashed with a strange luster. Suddenly, a burst of energy poured into Shueqianya's eyes, and the originally purple pupils instantly became deeper. The many zombies that attacked her suddenly turned their spears and attacked their companions beside them like the sharp claw zombie. Shueqianya, who was wearing a purple shirt, turned into a ball of gray mist, passed through layers of zombies, and came to a place in the zombie battlefield. On the edge of the street, a huge mutant zombie with bloodthirsty eyes was seen. The zombie opened its bloody mouth and pounced towards a young man in a black windbreaker. The latter had a calm face, and was holding a piece of dried fruit in his left hand to taste. The huge shadow of the mutant zombie came, but Muqiu did not move at all. I saw Muqiu slowly raised his right arm and blocked the mutant zombie's forehead. It was the seemingly understated block, but it was like a mountain pressing down on this mutant zombie as big as a giant gorilla. The swift impact became a joke in front of Mewtwo. No matter how the mutant zombie struggled, his arms were waving violently in the air, but he could not touch Mewtwo at all. This picture was like an adult holding down a baby who was making trouble everywhere. At this moment, a gray mist floated over, and Mewtwo smiled. "Xiao Ya, what's wrong?" His right hand still lightly pressed down the mutant zombie in front of him, which was several times larger than Mewtwo. The gray mist gradually became solid, and Xueqianya's figure emerged from it. "Teacher." Xueqianya looked a little anxious, and said to Mewtwo, "Teacher, there is something wrong with Zhang Yuan and his team." Xueqianya frowned slightly. In the battle just now, she faintly felt a familiar breath emanating from Zhang Yuan and his team. This breath is very weak to others, and it is even more common among the zombies. But Xueqianya, who has been controlling this power for many years, is extremely sensitive to it. At first, she was just suspicious, but as Zhang Yuan's men frequently used their supernatural powers, Xueqianya's perception in her heart became clearer and clearer. Corpse Qi. The breath she sensed from Zhang Yuan's men was the unique corpse Qi of zombies. Xueqianya, who was extremely surprised, immediately sensed the smell of conspiracy, so she hurried to tell Mewtwo about it. Oh! Mewtwo's face did not show any surprise, but he looked at Xueqianya with a look of relief. "There is progress, Xiao. It seems that your practice has begun to bear fruit." Xueqianya still didn't understand, but saw a ball of ice blue mist suddenly burst out from Mewtwo's outstretched palm. The mutant zombie, which was as big as an orangutan, was frozen into an ice sculpture at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then shattered in an instant under the powerful energy fluctuations, turning into prisms. The majestic frost mist even froze and shattered dozens of zombies around with the aftermath. And Mewtwo, the initiator of all this, seemed to crush a few ants with his hands, and swallowed the last piece of dried fruit into his stomach. Mewtwo clapped his hands and squinted his eyes to look at the center of the zombie tide. There, the battle was the most intense. Leave this troublesome matter to Ji Yufeng. In the center of the zombie tide, with the bombardment of artillery fire and the hunting of many awakened people, the originally surging zombie tide has become tired. Ji Yufeng shuttled through the rolling zombie tide, and the blue light blade in his hand seemed to have become the sickle in the hands of the god of death. The heavy corpse fell to the ground, and after getting rid of an A-level zombie, Ji Yufeng's figure stopped. The number of zombies around has been visibly decreasing. It is expected that within half an hour, the zombies in the adjacent blocks will be cleared out. But Ji Yufeng frowned slightly, with a thoughtful look on his face. The middle-aged man next to him noticed Ji Yufeng's abnormality and said, "Yufeng, what's wrong?" "No." Ji Yufeng looked around at the surging zombies. "The level of these zombies is too low." Ji Yufeng's words also stunned the middle-aged man. "Yes, this zombie tide seems to be huge in number, but they are generally low-level zombies. There were really few really difficult existences, even the A-level zombies were few and far between, and Ji Yufeng alone wiped them out. Maybe there aren't many high-level zombies in this block. After all, the dangerous city center is not far from here." The middle-aged man didn't care. After all, their equipment and numbers were top-notch. The number of awakened people was as high as thousands, and as long as such a lineup didn't encounter the terrible existence of destruction, there would be no danger of annihilation. Ji Yufeng didn't speak, just stared at the sky of the city in the distance. There, it is a dangerous area that they have not explored yet. Count the number of people, clean up the scene, arrange personnel to investigate the corpse tide riot, and rest in the surrounding area tonight. Yes. In the dim night sky, the originally dead city has a little bit of popularity at night. A burning bonfire rose from the ground, and many human survivors gathered together to feast. Thousands of people filled the entire street, and the noisy sound brought a long-lost vitality to the city. The fragrance of food came from the bonfire, and the firelight reflected the hungry eyes around. This is to celebrate the great victory of today's operation. This victory means that the troops led by Ji Yufeng have taken another big step towards clearing the city. Just as many humans gathered to celebrate, two figures stood on the high-rise building next to them. Zhang Yuan was wearing a sports shirt, and standing next to him was his wife in white clothes with a dull face and a faint red glow in her eyes. "Yuner, be patient, it will be over soon." Zhang Yuan held his wife's fair wrist with a gentle expression. Suddenly, footsteps came from behind him, and Zhang Yuan's face changed instantly. He turned his head and said, "Who?" Mu Qiu, wearing a black robe and a white shirt, walked slowly towards him holding Yu Qi's delicate wrist, with a faint smile on his face. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 196. Who? A flash of murderous intent flashed across Zhang Yuan's eyes. When Zhang Yuan turned his head suddenly, he saw Mu Qiu leading a pink-haired girl in a corseted long skirt from a distance. It turned out to be Brother Mu. When he found out that the person coming was Mu Qiu, a smile quickly appeared on Zhang Yuan's face, and murderous intent was hidden in his eyes. After a few days of getting along, Zhang Yuan also learned from some law enforcement soldiers that the seemingly young man in front of him was the famous Yu Haibing Jun. Even in the hearts of many people, this hidden elemental awakener is slightly stronger than Ji Yufeng, who is known as the White Death God. Looking at Mu Qiu, who looked indifferent, Zhang Yuan secretly became alert. The reason was that Mu Qiu came quietly with a woman, and he didn't even notice a trace of aura. If the other party hadn't intentionally concealed the footsteps, he might not have noticed that Mu Qiu had brought people behind Zhang Yuan. Watching the moon on the rooftop, with a beautiful woman by my side, I didn't expect that Brother Zhang would have such a refined taste. Mu Qiu took 11 Qi's delicate little hand and walked to the opposite side of Zhang Yuan and his wife, with a faint smile on his face. The moonlight shone down, reflecting Mu Qiu's handsome face and 11 Qi's delicate face beside him, a talented man and a beautiful woman. The noisy sound of a large army could still be vaguely heard from below the tall building. This seemed to be just a coincidence. Zhang Yuan smiled when he heard it, turned around and looked at his wife beside him. "It's Yuner who doesn't like a noisy environment, so I brought her up to be quiet." The woman next to him, who was called Yuner by Zhang Yuan, was wearing a white dress, her face was dull, and her eyes were even more empty. Under the smooth skin, there was a strange sense of paleness. The moonlight shone on the woman, and with the white dress she was wearing, her eyes were empty, her skin was like snow, and she stood straight beside Zhang Yuan. The whole person looked like a vegetable. "Madam, what's wrong?" Mu Qiu's face showed a puzzled expression at the right time. "Yuner became like this because of me." Zhang Yuan suddenly clenched his fists, regret in his eyes. "In a battle with zombies, Yuner was attacked by zombies to save me. After treatment, she became like this." Zhang Yuan's face revealed a deep sense of powerlessness. "It's all because of me. If I were strong enough, Yuner wouldn't." Mu Qiu didn't say anything to comfort him, but just nodded and said, "It can be seen that you and your wife have a loving relationship." Zhang Yuan's face showed a look of reminiscence. "Actually, we didn't live in this city before. When the apocalypse just broke out, Yuner and I were on our honeymoon in the city." Zhang Yuan looked at his wife beside him, but all he could see were empty eyes. "I once promised Yuner that I would take care of her for the rest of her life and give her a happy home." Mu Qiu chuckled. "What a luxurious wish. In this cold and cruel apocalypse, how many families have been broken up? Even for those living in the base's safe zone, the word home is too luxurious. Zhang Yuan laughed at himself. Yeah, how can this world give us hope of survival? Holding his wife's white wrist tightly, Zhang Yuan's eyes were firm. But even so, I must give Yuner a stable home, and no one can destroy it. Zhang Yuan showed his true feelings, turned to look at Mu Qiu and smiled. Sorry, brother Mu, I made a fool of you. Mu Qiu looked at Zhang Yuan and shook his head slowly. I never laugh at a person with a dream, even if the dream is a little unrealistic. Unrealistic dream. If all this is a dream, Yuner won't. Zhang Yuan murmured. Suddenly, he stopped talking and sighed. But even if it is a dream, I want to make Yuner's wish come true. Mu Qiu saw Zhang Yuan's reaction and smiled. In that case, I wish your dream comes true. Under the moonlight, the four figures of two men and two women on the high-rise building were reflected. The two men looked at each other with smiles, each with their own thoughts. The two women were both stunned, with expressions different from those of ordinary people. After a while, on the top of the tall building, the moonlight was charming. Zhang Yuan and his wife's figures disappeared, leaving only Mu Qiu and Yu Qi looking into the distance. Yu Qi's sweet singing came melodiously. If the end of the world has come, who can end it? The symphony of collapse resounds. The falling raindrops are like the sound of tears. People dominated by desire. When did hatred occupy their hearts? Forgot the love in their hearts. Qiu. Yu Qi suddenly looked at Mu Qiu. Why is that woman's mood so strange? Yu Qi could feel that Zhang Yuan's wife's mood was extremely violent, as if she wanted to tear everything in front of her. But when Zhang Yuan held her hand, the crazy emotion disappeared immediately. It was hard to express that feeling, so Yui could only describe it as strange. Mu Qiu rubbed Yui's soft long hair, raised the corners of her mouth, and looked gentle. I think this is love. Yui nodded cutely, without any change in her expression. She was a little confused when she learned the answer. The noisy crowd below brought long-lost popularity to this long-silent city. The night sky was full of stars, but the coolness of autumn was dispelled by the rising bonfire smoke. Mu Qiu stared at the crowd below, then smiled and said, Zhang Yuan. What an interesting person. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 197. The city's streets were riddled with bullet holes and the marks of gunfire. The smell of gunpowder smoke in the air gradually covered up the smell of blood, and the ground was covered with the broken limbs of zombies. Captain, the surrounding streets have been cleared. Numerous law enforcement team soldiers gathered around Ji Yufeng and were waiting. The awakens on both sides still had murderous aura on their bodies, and their clothes were soaked with countless fresh blood. Another fierce battle with zombie monsters. Ji Yufeng didn't reply, but looked at the corpses that were already rising up on the ground. Continuous blood flowed from the corpse, gradually gathering into pools of blood. After a while, Ji Yufeng looked around and slowly said, carry out searches nearby according to the original plan, and report any situation in a timely manner. Yes. The large army of thousands of people quickly dispersed into search teams. Hundreds of modified armored vehicles drove at high speed in all directions of the city. Ji Yufeng stood there, followed by a group of law enforcement team soldiers. The breeze blows, and the monsoon wind stares at the distant sky. The city's horizon is still unusually calm. But somehow, he had an ominous premonition. There is a neighborhood near the center of the city that has not yet been cleared. The low roars of countless zombies came from all over the streets. The groups of corpses here were several times scarier than the zombies on the edge of the city. Huge numbers of mutated zombies abound in the center of the block. A huge, fast bird flew through the air, opened its mouth, and swallowed a zombie in an instant. The flying bird stood on the ground, its wings flapping, and its pupils turning to search for the next prey. But just when the bird was about to spread its wings, the shadow under its feet suddenly moved. I saw the shadows of flying birds on the ground flowing like ink. A dark arm suddenly opened from the shadow and grabbed the bird's paw tightly. The mutant bird began to struggle violently, its feathers flew away, and its sharp claws left deep scratches on the ground. But the black arm clamped it tightly, unable to move. The mass of ink under the feet began to climb rapidly, and finally gradually formed a human-shaped ink shadow. It clings to the huge body of the mutated bird and gradually devours it. A moment later, an ink-colored bird with a dark body like a shadow flew through the air, with a cold murderous intent in its eyes. The sky was gradually covered by a cloud. Countless human-shaped shadows as black as ink rose out of thin air on the ground. In the end, black-clad ninjas gradually formed, all covered in black, with red eyes and sharp weapons in their hands. Looking around, there were more black ninjas on the entire street than there were zombies. Among the many black ninjas are some strange black monsters, which exude powerful energy fluctuations. The moment these black-clad ninjas appeared, they launched a fierce attack on the zombie monsters around them like a surge. And when the bodies of those zombie monsters fell down, a black-clothed ninja opened his palms. The invisible devouring power was released, and the bodies of the zombie monsters became shriveled and skinny in an instant. And the black-clothed ninja who had swallowed up the energy began to transform into a zombie monster. Are these my brother's men? It's really scary. On the street, 3 figures, 1 man, 2 women, stood quietly. Chi-Chi, who was wearing a long skirt with a waistband, and Dyer, a girl in a red skirt, stood on both sides of Mu-Chiu. Looking at the black-clothed ninjas killing wantonly in front of them, Dyer looked shocked. Even she didn't know that her brother had unexpectedly gathered such a large group of black-robed warriors with strange abilities. A crimson light flashed deep in Mu-Chiu's pupils. A terrifying aura that made Dyer feel palpitated quickly dissipated. Mu-Chiu put away the dark energy deep in her heart, turned to look at Dyer, narrowed her eyes slightly, and said with a smile, "How's it going? Not bad, right?" Dyer nodded heavily. "More than just good. These black-clothed ninjas are spread all over the street, and their movement skills are erratic and fast. They are comparable to some speed awakeners. Coupled with the fact that each of them is not afraid of death and cooperates with each other tacitly, they are simply an army of natural killers. Even some high-level heretics will be ruined by this ant-killing attack if they are not careful. What's more, these ninjas also have the devouring power inherited from her brother, and their promotion speed is as fast as a rocket. Dyer can even feel that several existences inside are faintly about to surpass the A-level level." Mu-Chiu's eyes narrowed, with a smile on her face, her robes fluttering behind her, and she stepped towards the center of the block ahead. The surrounding zombies have been cleared away, and the entire street is filled with black ninjas in pitch darkness. Black-clothed Sung Soon, as Mu-Chiu's figure continued to advance, many black-clothed ninjas on both sides bent down and knelt down. When Mu-Chiu walked to the center of the street, a circular area was already vacant beside her. On both sides of the empty circle, countless black monsters knelt down on one knee, their heads lowered, showing their submission. At this moment, the man in black standing in the center of countless shadow monsters looked like a living king. "Captain, coordinates to the southeast, requesting support." "Requesting?" The anxious voice on the intercom stopped abruptly, and only the red dot on the positioning device flashed frequently. Ji Yufeng put away the walkie-talkie and looked at the location in the distance. The middle-aged man beside him came forward. "Yufeng, what's the situation?" "A search team is in danger." Ji Yufeng looked calm and said, "Call the surrounding search teams and go to the target location immediately to carry out rescue." "We'll go first." The middle-aged man nodded and quickly gave orders to the law enforcement team soldiers beside him. A few minutes later, several dark green military vehicles sped through the street. At the same time, the communicators of all nearby teams received the rescue notice of the assembly. About a quarter of an hour later, the military vehicle where Ji Yufeng was rushed to an abandoned unfinished building. The location shown on the communicator is here. The middle-aged man looked at the positioning device in his hand and said. The hundreds of law enforcement team members behind him all looked solemn, and aimed their guns and live ammunition at the abandoned buildings in front of them. At this moment, a shrill scream suddenly came from the building. A man in law enforcement uniform fell from a tall building and died on the spot. Everyone looked over and saw that the man who fell from the building had all his limbs broken, his facial features bleeding, and he looked miserable. Before everyone could react, there were heavy roars of zombies around. Everyone looked around and found that a dark mass of zombies poured in from the street entrances in all directions, gradually surrounding the law enforcement team of hundreds of people. Several tall figures jumped down from the tall building, and what shocked many law enforcement team members was that they actually knew the people in front of them. What's going on? You are here. Dozens of figures slowly walked out of the shadows in front of them, and strong energy fluctuations swept from the crowd. At this moment, Zhang Yuan and his team, who joined the team a few days ago, were facing them. White Death. Zhang Yuan stood on the opposite side of the law enforcement team with an indifferent face, and his wife and dozens of companions stood beside him. Behind them, there was a terrifying horde of corpses that stretched as far as the eye could see. As Zhang Yuan approached, his skin began to dry and turn yellow at a speed visible to the naked eye, deep cracks began to appear on his face, and a set of armor like an ancient general appeared on his body. And the energy fluctuations emanating from his body were even more frightening. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 198. The energy fluctuations emanating from Zhang Yuan were S-level, just like Ji Yufeng. What's going on? Zhang Yuan, what are you doing? Many soldiers from the law enforcement team saw Zhang Yuan and his party blocking the way ahead, and couldn't help but shout. They didn't expect that the wanderers originally recruited from the ruins were so powerful. But then, dozens of awakened people behind Zhang Yuan also burst out with strong energy fluctuations. These people's bodies were covered with dry cracks, their bodies were thin, and the color of their skin changed from normal waxy yellow to a strange purple blue. There were fangs exposed at the corners of their mouths, and with their wrinkled purple skin, they looked like a group of zombies with consciousness from a distance. What's more terrifying is that in addition to Zhang Yuan being a terrifying S-level strongman, the auras emanating from the many awakened people behind him were all above B-level. At the same time, the zombies that emerged from the surroundings also came to Zhang Yuan and others. Strangely, these irrational bloodthirsty monsters did not attack Zhang Yuan and others, but stared at the hundreds of law enforcement soldiers in front of them with fierce eyes. Ji Yufeng stared at Zhang Yuan in front of him expressionlessly. You did all this, right? Zhang Yuan's face no longer had a smile on it, but his expression was stiff and indifferent. Bronze armor covered his body, and the cracks on his face were deep. He looked like a mummy general resurrected from an ancient tomb. What kind of monsters are these? Are they all zombies? The many law enforcement soldiers behind Ji Yufeng stared at Zhang Yuan and his group who had become zombies. It's zombies. On a tall building in the distance, Mu Qiu looked at the law enforcement team below that was surrounded by zombies. With a smile, he explained to Dyer beside him. The reason why they are not besieged by zombies is that they are also the same kind of zombies in a sense. Dyer and Yuichi stood on both sides of Mu Qiu. The former was amazed after hearing Mu Qiu's answer. No wonder I felt the corpse gas on them before. Dyer's face showed curiosity, and her fingers were placed in front of her rosy lips. This is the first time I have seen such a strange zombie. It has not reached the destruction level and can still have consciousness. Mu Qiu shook his head and chuckled, no, they are still somewhat different from zombies in essence. Mu Qiu lowered his eyes and looked at Zhang Yuan wearing bronze armor. I think the root of everything is on him. Dyer also followed Mu Qiu's gaze, but heard Mu Qiu slowly say. Special mutant ability zombie. The abilities of the mutant awakeners are all kinds of strange. Some only show partial mutations in the body, such as a certain part becoming stronger, limbs becoming more flexible. Other mutation systems mutate in the direction of animals, such as the lizardmen, tigermen, werewolves, etc. that Mu Qiu has encountered. But there is a rare special group in the mutation system, and the ability of this group is even not weaker than the rare elemental awakeners. Such as Liu Qingqian's nine-tailed fox, Liu Qingfei's fiancé's vampire, and the special mutation system ability awakened by Zhang Yuan in front of him zombie. After turning into a zombie, not only did he have a strong physique, but he also had the ability to infect people with zombie corpse poison. And those men behind him are lower-level zombies that have been mutated after being infected with corpse poison. The ability of zombies makes Zhang Yuan a walking virus source. It is really surprising that Zhang Yuan's ability can turn ordinary people into zombies. This unique ability is unheard of even by Dyer, who is at the destruction level. Not only that, they have innate immunity to zombies because their blood has become zombies, and the speed and saturation of absorbing zombie crystal cores are far higher than ordinary awakeners. This means that Zhang Yuan has the ability to mass-produce high-level zombies. Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhang Yuan and his group with interest. Next, it was Ji Yufeng and Zhang Yuan, the confrontation between humans and zombies. The zombie group had completely surrounded the law enforcement team of hundreds of people. Countless hideous and terrifying zombies stared at the living humans in front of them, and murmured like a cassette in their throats. You are the most dangerous existence in the city. Ji Yufeng and Zhang Yuan looked at each other and said this shocking fact calmly. When their eyes met, both sides saw indifference and undisguised murderous intent in each other's eyes. This city is no longer a place that humans can set foot on. From the moment you entered the city, your death is doomed. As soon as Zhang Yuan finished speaking, the ground beneath his feet suddenly sank, and the solid ground instantly became loose, and then turned into yellow sand all over the sky, flying and scattering. When the drought demon appears, the land is barren for thousands of miles. Zhang Yuan's ability is far from the level of the ancestor of zombies, but the strength he has shown now is enough to scare people. The terrifying aura of withering shocked the nerves of everyone present. The next second, Zhang Yuan's body moved. The figure wearing bronze armor rushed towards Ji Yufeng. The flowers and plants on the ground along the way were as if their lives were taken away and they quickly fell apart. As Zhang Yuan moved, the stiff faces of many zombies behind him also showed a hint of a grim smile. Immediately, dozens of high-level zombies led the terrifying zombie tide behind them to rush towards the law enforcement team. A huge battle between humans and zombies with a huge disparity in numbers began. The sound of gunfire instantly resounded in the block surrounded by zombies. The battlefield filled with blood and gunpowder started again, but this time it was the human side who was desperately trying to protect themselves. Dozens of high-level zombies were strong and extremely flexible, completely different from the zombies with stiff limbs and rigid movements in film and television dramas. Coupled with the siege of the fierce zombie tide, the law enforcement team with a huge difference in combat power could only shrink together and barely protect themselves. And those dozens of high-level zombies were more like playing with prey, lingering on the edge of the law enforcement team in a playful manner. In an instant, the human side fell into a difficult and bitter battle. Among them, the most intense battle was the battle between the highest level leaders of the human side and the zombie side. In the center of the battle circle, Ji Yufeng and Zhang Yuan. Ji Yufeng held two laser swords, and the surrounding space fluctuated violently, and the space energy was released frequently by him. Everyone could only vaguely see a group of white shadows flickering in the space. Zhang Yuan's attack seemed extremely fierce, waving his arms, and waves of yellow sand swept through. Zhang Yuan's surroundings seemed to form a yellow sand field. Anyone invaded by this corrosive yellow sand, whether it was a zombie or a human body, instantly turned into a handful of yellow soil. Even Ji Yufeng could only use the extreme speed of space shuttle to constantly test and attack Zhang Yuan's body, and dared not touch his edge. Suddenly, Ji Yufeng realized that Zhang Yuan's seemingly fierce attack had a fatal weakness. Without any hesitation, Ji Yufeng's figure flashed again and suddenly appeared behind Zhang Yuan. The hot laser cut through the sky, aiming directly at the back of Zhang Yuan's head. With a swoosh sound, the laser sword in his hand was hit by nothing. And Zhang Yuan's figure gradually became dim, until it disappeared in the air like a projection. Ji Yufeng's face was moved, and a whirlwind of sand suddenly swept behind him. The space around him fluctuated again, and Ji Yu narrowly escaped this fatal blow. Illusion. Ji Yufeng's eyes shook slightly, and he turned his head to look at a shadow somewhere below. There stood a female zombie wearing a white wedding dress, with a pale face and an empty expression. This is Zhang Yuan's wife Yun'er. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 199. Zhi. On the roof, stood Mu Qiu in a black robe, and Yu Ichi in a corseted long skirt stood silently beside Mu Qiu. Dai, who turned into a butterfly, coiled around Mu Qiu's shoulder, and the girl's crisp voice rang out. No wonder I sensed the fluctuation of illusions in them before, it turned out that it was this female zombie who did it. Both Mu Qiu and Dai could feel that Zhang Yuan's wife was not a zombie, but a real spiritual zombie. Zombies and zombies are paired, this Zhang Yuan is really good at playing. Mu Qiu stroked his chin and teased with a smile. Ji Yufeng floated in the air with the power of space, staring at the female zombie in a white wedding dress below. Another S-level existence. No wonder even Ji Yufeng didn't realize that Zhang Yuan and his party were zombies. It all depends on this zombie with spiritual powers to help cover up the corpse gas emanating from them. In the team of thousands of people, no one noticed their true appearance. Before Ji Yufeng could be surprised, Zhang Yuan, who was not far behind him, had already attacked him again. As a mutant zombie, Zhang Yuan not only had a strong body, but also could control the power of yellow sand, and his destructive power was increased by more than one level. What's more, there was a mental zombie who specialized in creating illusions to interfere with him. The combination of the two made Ji Yufeng fall into a bitter battle in an instant. Zhang Yuan's footsteps trampled on the ground, and the earth sank. In an instant, more violent giant sand appeared around him. The whole person was like being swept into a sandstorm, wantonly cutting everything in the wild sand. Even the buildings were destroyed and cracked under the corrosion and invasion of the yellow sand, and the powerful and fierce momentum shocked the hearts of every human present. This Zhang Yuan, even among many S-level heretics, is at the top level. Ji Yufeng kept using the power of space to teleport, and white figures flashed in the yellow sand. The crystal blue laser flashed over Zhang Yuan's head, but it was only a residual image. A fierce fist wind accompanied by wild sand hit Ji Yufeng's head, but Zhang Yuan's figure appeared behind him, and he also punched out. Ji Yufeng used the power of space to escape, but suddenly his heart was throbbing. His pupils shrank suddenly, and Ji Yufeng covered his heart fiercely, but the fist wind above his head and in front of him was already approaching. There was a loud bang, and the ground where Ji Yufeng was originally located was instantly splashed with yellow sand, and a deep pit was directly smashed into the ground. Zhang Yuan, wearing bronze armor, walked out of the yellow sand, followed by his wife in a white wedding dress. Zhang Yuan's wife's face was still pale, and her pupils were slightly revealing murderous intent and bloodthirsty instincts. This is the nature of zombies, an instinct that cannot be suppressed. Zhang Yuan looked up at the eaves in the distance. Ji Yufeng's figure flashed out from it. But this time, the White Death God looked quite embarrassed. Due to the long-term space shuttle, the white suit had been cut into pieces by the space turbulence. One sleeve was broken, and Ji Yufeng covered his arm that was still bleeding, and his chest was violently heaving like a blower. His old illness relapsed, and he once again felt the feeling of his heart being cut. At such an important time. Brother, he seems to be dying. On the rooftop of the top floor, the strange butterfly transformed by Dyer fluttered in Mu Chiu's ears, with a cheerful tone. It didn't matter to her who won or lost, but the girl's nature of liking to watch the show could not be changed. Mu Chiu looked at the embarrassed Ji Yufeng below, shook his head and smiled. If the White Death God is only this level, then I am a little disappointed. There was no big emotional fluctuation in Mu Chiu's words. It was as if the fierce battle below was just a game to him. Ji Yufeng covered his slightly relieved chest, and below him were countless gushing zombies and his trapped men. He knew that the energy in his body could only support him to move through space once more. With his speed of space travel, even the 2S level beings below could not stop him if he wanted to leave. The choice began. Suddenly, the encirclement formed by the human camp was forcibly opened by many powerful zombies. Countless zombies poured into the crowd through the gap, and a brutal feast of killing began instantly. Ji Yufeng's eyes flickered, and dozens of soldiers of the law enforcement team had died in the mouths of zombies in an instant. At this moment, a woman's scream came from the crowd. Ji Yufeng turned his head suddenly, but found a familiar short-haired figure trapped in the heavy encirclement of zombies. Xiao Yu. Ji Yufeng's pupils shrank slightly, and he used the power of space without any hesitation. Space ripples rippled around him, and Ji Yufeng disappeared instantly. Ji Yu and several law enforcement soldiers were besieged by several high-level zombies. Witnessed that his companions were instantly cut into pieces by the strong zombies. Ji Yu's pair of silver eyes that could detect weaknesses were completely useless at this moment, and the zombies' sharp claws had already attacked. At this moment, a white vortex suddenly appeared in front of Ji Yu. Following that, two hot lasers with the intention of killing flashed by. In an instant, several zombies and many zombies behind them were cut in half, and blood flowed freely. Ji Yufeng, dressed in shabby clothes, walked out of the space vortex, breathing heavily. White Death, your ability to persist until now has exceeded my expectations. Zhang Yuan strode past the masses of corpses and stopped in front of the human camp. I admit that among the powerful humans I have come into contact with, you are the top one. Regarding Zhang Yuan's praise, Ji Yufeng looked indifferent and was not moved at all. But it's a pity that you will die here today. Zhang Yuan didn't say any more nonsense. He pushed forward with his arms, and the wind and sand under his feet began to stir wildly, turning into a small sandstorm in an instant. Ji Yufeng's eyes were fixed on the sandstorm tornado that was getting closer and closer. Elder brother. Ji Yu noticed something strange about Ji Yufeng, with a look of concern on her face. With difficulty, he gave his sister an embarrassing smile. The next second, Ji Yufeng took out an injection with dark red solution from his arms and injected it into his chest. Suddenly, a powerful wave that moved Zhang Yuandu burst out from Ji Yufeng's body. And the sandstorm tornado with the ultimate destructive power also rushed towards Ji Yufeng's position at this time. I just said he is not that simple. On the rooftop, watching Ji Yufeng inject the strengthening potion, the corners of Mu Chiu's mouth rose. The show is about to begin again. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 200. Ji Yufeng suddenly raised his hand and injected the dark red mysterious injection into his chest. As some liquid in the syringe was injected into the heart, beads of sweat dripped from his forehead, and the expression on Ji Yufeng's face became distorted in an instant. Ji Yufeng's body was enveloped by a white space vortex, making it difficult to see his figure. At the same time, amazing energy fluctuations exploded and spread from Ji Yufeng's body. Countless zombies surrounding him were sucked into the space vortex. In an instant, the zombies' bodies were cut and shattered by sharp space fragments, and blurred flesh and blood flew across. And the yellow sand tornado released by Zhang Yuan also swept towards Ji Yufeng's direction at this moment. I saw that the sky was full of killing and instantly lifted up a large area of land, and everything was annihilated. Suddenly, a strong space fluctuation centered on Ji Yufeng, like a wave, rippled in all directions. The yellow sand is split. A blinding white light flashed past, and countless space fragments spread out, splitting the sandstorm released by Zhang Yuan like a sharp lens. When the white light faded, a figure slowly stepped out of the space vortex. It's the captain. The remaining law enforcement soldiers cast their eyes on the figure that walked out of the space vortex, their faces delighted. However, the appearance of Ji Yufeng who appeared this time was very different. The tattered coat was directly torn apart by the space turbulence. And a layer of transparent scales appeared on Ji Yufeng's cheeks, and half of his lower jaw turned into a skeleton. Clear and strong muscles can be seen on his bare chest and abdomen. Two narrow space arm blades grew out of his elbows, and his hand bones protruded forward, turning his hands into sharp blades. The spine joints on the back also protrude transparent space bone wings, which look like the ferocious wings of the god of death from a distance. Captain, Captain. The law enforcement team beside him looked at Ji Yufeng, who had changed drastically, in disbelief, with shocked expressions. At this moment, Ji Yufeng looked more like a humanoid monster than Zhang Yuan in the distance. In order to regain our sanity, we suppressed the power in our bodies and turned into human form, while some humans turned into monsters in order to gain power. What a irony, brother! On the rooftop of the high-rise building, a strange pink butterfly coiled around Mu Chiu's shoulder. The girl's sweet laughter came, and Mu Chiu looked at Ji Yufeng, whose image had changed drastically, and chuckled. Space travel only brings him the speed of instant movement and flexible body movements. The real reason why Ji Yufeng is so powerful is all because of his amazing perseverance in overcoming pain. Mu Chiu could feel that speed was Ji Yufeng's specialty, and his own strength was only slightly stronger than that of ordinary people. The strong physique of the White Death depends entirely on the long-term injection of body-strengthening drugs. While this drug brings physical strengthening to him, the price paid is to destroy every organ in his body. Even this kind of severe pain that occurs all the time is not something that ordinary people can bear. Now Ji Yufeng is like a candle in the wind, exchanging his few lives for strength. This is a deal with the god of death. Brother. Ji Yu looked at Ji Yufeng, whose appearance had changed drastically, with a dazed expression. The low roar of the zombies came from the side. Ji Yufeng's head was lowered, and the transparent limbs on his body flashed with an inexplicable luster. The next moment, Ji Yufeng's figure moved. Almost without any signs, Ji Yufeng's figure had flashed hundreds of meters out of thin air. And where he passed, a group of sonic booms suddenly sounded, and countless space cracks suddenly exploded around him. Sharp space fragments crossed, and hundreds of zombie heads instantly flew across the air, and blood splattered. Ji Yufeng's face was as cold as ice, the power of space surged, and the laser swords in his hands showed dazzling white light. The white lightsaber cut through the sky, and this time the target was still Zhang Yuan's back neck. What was even more bizarre was that the dazzling laser shuttled through space at the moment it stabbed Zhang Yuan. In an instant, the lightsaber mixed with space debris had pierced Zhang Yuan's head. However, Zhang Yuan's body still turned into a shadow, and he stabbed into the air with one blow. There was a strong wind wrapped in yellow sand and attacked by his ears, and if it was the previous Ji Yufeng, he would not have had time to take this blow. A cold light flashed in Ji Yufeng's eyes, and his body turned in the air, not retreating but advancing. Ji Yufeng's arm suddenly pushed back, and the space arm blade with his elbow turned outward shone coldly under the light. In an instant, the sharp space arm blade blocked Zhang Yuan's punch from behind. The strong fist wrapped in yellow sand collided with the space arm blade, and the powerful energy fluctuations caused the surrounding space to vibrate and distort. Zhang Yuan's face suddenly showed a look of shock. This arm blade seemed to be Ji Yufeng's limbs, and he could control it at will. However, before Zhang Yuan could react, the transparent space arm blade passed through the space, swept through the yellow sand, and instantly slashed at his arm. Then, Ji Yufeng suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Yuan, and the hot light blade in his hand passed by. Zhang Yuan's pupils shrank slightly, and it was too late to retreat, so he had to stretch out his fists and blast out. The next second, Ji Yufeng's figure disappeared again, and when he saw him again, he was already hundreds of meters away from Zhang Yuan. Blood dripped down, and a deep wound was cut on Zhang Yuan's shoulder that could see the bone. Even with the powerful physique of zombies, they can't resist the sharp space blade. Zhang Yuan looked at the monster figure in front of him with horror. This is the real White Death God. Zhang Yuan is not a fool. At this time, he has realized the seriousness of the matter. With a roar, he immediately commanded the zombies beside him to launch a siege against Ji Yufeng. WWW. Dozens of zombies immediately surrounded Ji Yufeng. Combined with the illusion created by Zhang Yuan's wife, there were hundreds of high-level zombies with amazing energy fluctuations on the field. Each fluctuation was extremely real, and it was difficult to distinguish between true and false. Hundreds of powerful and flexible terrifying zombies attacked Ji Yufeng together. Ji Yufeng stood in place, and suddenly a circle of white holes appeared around him. The next moment, countless blade-sized space fragments suddenly shot out from the white hole. The dazzling white fragments suddenly disappeared in the air, and the next second they were ejected from the space in another direction. Compared to mental illusions, such space attacks are even more difficult to defend against. Instantly, everyone could only hear the sound of sonic booms coming from the air. Then, lens-like space blades pierced into the vital parts of zombies. Even the remaining zombies around were not spared. People often only saw a white line passing through, and then a zombie's head exploded, and blood flowed.